Okay, so in the last video we kind of were talking about D.W. Griffith and some of his innovations that he brought to the table, such as using the long shot and the close-up. But we'll talk about some of the Russian directors. So the first one we'll talk about is Lev Kuleshov. He kind of discovered that viewers' emotions persist from one shot to the next, even if they're really unrelated in content. So maybe a shot showing a smiling actor followed by a plate of food would make the food seem more attractive. And then if the actor was grimacing and then the shot of food was shown directly after, it would make the food seem kind of gross and unattractive. So this is kind of a technique that he used a lot. And today it's called the Kuleshov effect. It's widely used. Another Russian director was Sergei Eisenstein. He kind of further develops Griffith's directorial techniques, and he develops them even further. So he actually made up the idea of the montage, which is kind of just combining a number of brief shots to represent distinct but related subject matter. So you've all seen them before. I mean, Rocky Balboa, the first Rocky film. I'm not sure if you guys have seen it because you guys are fairly young. It's a movie that came out, I believe, in the late 70s maybe, but there's a pretty famous montage in that. And usually there's music that plays over, and it's kind of to build strong emotion, and it indicates the passage of time, and it usually shows a lot of things happening in a short amount of time in the film. So it's kind of an interesting technique that Sergei Eisenstein came up with. And so one of the most famous early examples of a montage is Eisenstein's sequence of powerful scenes, edited together in his movie Battleship Potemkin. And it basically shows kind of a series of different shots, all edited together, and it kind of shows the terrible climax of the failed revolt as the army troops crush a protest. So there's kind of a mixture of close-ups and long shots, and it really kind of shows the tragedy of this historic event. And it wasn't, all shot in one way. Like I said, he intermixed many close-ups to give the viewers the sensation of being caught up in the middle of the violence and being a part of that violence. And it really gave people a powerful sense of what it was like and how scary it was. So this is a really kind of a famous series of shots that were all put together to kind of show this protest that's really being violently crushed from 1925. And this is a montage, example of a montage. That's not the actual footage from the film, but you can kind of get an idea from those still shots. So we'll talk about Salvador Dali and Luis Buñuel. So they kind of made this movie in 1929 called An Andalusian Dog. And it kind of represents a collective dream in which a group of people are sitting in the dark. They kind of experience the same vivid story. And it's really kind of ethereal and strange and doesn't always make a lot of sense. It's kind of irrational. There's kind of like ants crawling out of a man's head, two dead donkeys lying next to each other in a pair of grand pianos. But basically the overall theme is unrealized sexual desires. And it kind of has some hallucinogenic references. And it's silent with a musical accompaniment. So it actually came out during a time where they had movies with actual sound in them, but they didn't actually, it's just a silent with a musical accompaniment. This particular film by Salvador Dali and Luis Buñuel. So color was introduced during the 1930s, and widescreen and three-dimensional images came in the 1950s. So we'll kind of jump basically from the talkies to the 70s now. We'll talk about Hollywood a little bit. So beginning in the late, or actually no, just in the 1930s, movie studios began to grow into large companies, and each had its own producer, director, technicians, and actors. And these firms actually controlled most of the cinema output into the 1960s. Hollywood became definitely the largest production site for the world's movies, beginning in the 1930s. So Hollywood studios kind of adhered to the motion picture production code, which really regulated the moral content of movies during this time. And the code was pretty strict. It forbade, profanity, sexual activity, drug use, and even interracial romance, which is kind of crazy, but I guess during that time that was the reality. It also prohibited the glamorization of crime, so basically all criminals had to be arrested or killed in the end of the movie. And studios actually had to submit their scripts to the Motion Picture Code company before they even started shooting. And then they had to get that code of seal of approval, basically, to get widely distributed. So they kind of ended up relaxing a little bit with Gone with the Winds. When Clark Gable, the main character, basically at the end, says, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," and he cussed. He said, "Damn," and it did remain in the movie, but the producer had to pay $5,000 for it to the Motion Picture Production Code. And so over the decades, the code eventually kind of went away and the authority declined. But it remained in effect until around 1968. And then the Motion Picture Association of America kind of took over, and they came up with a rating system. So like rated R, PG-13, G, those kinds of ratings. And those are still in force today. So those ended up, replacing the code that was before that. The Motion Picture Association of America rating system became the new way of doing things. So in the 1930s and 40s, animators from the Walt Disney Studio kind of explored the possibilities of animation in film. So we'll talk about animation a little bit too. And animation is kind of the technique in which hand-drawn frames are photographed and projected in a sequence to create the illusion of motion. And Disney was the first to create an animated feature-length movie, Fantasia, and this was in 1940. And it was a new type of movie that integrated classical music, painting, dance, drama with a mix of human and cartoon characters as the stars of the movie. So it's actually a really neat movie. It was shot at 24 frames per second. So ideas for animations are usually portrayed on storyboards, which is kind of a series of still drawings or paintings arranged in a sequence to kind of show how time passes or how it will pass in the movie. And then they're kind of used to visualize the major shots that will make up the movie. And so layout artists work with the spatial relationships, and animators make the individual characters. And then Disney's goal was always to create characters who gave the illusion at 24 frames per second that they were not just movie, but also thinking and feeling creatures, even though they were drawn. And so that it's actually a really cool movie if you guys haven't seen it. I'm going to show, a famous scene from, I think I will try to show this to you just quickly. I don't know if you guys have even heard of Fantasia, but when I was growing up, I did actually watch this a little bit, and it's really neat. So you can hear the classical music in the background, and Mickey Mouse, he's a famous character. He's not the only animated character in the story, but he's one of the main ones. So this is a really famous scene. So you can kind of see what's happening here. But anyway, I didn't really let you watch it long enough to get the idea, but still kind of a cool movie. And that's just part of it. Like some of it has unicorns in it and all sorts of different things. It's a pretty neat movie, really. If you haven't seen it, you might want to check it out. I'm sure it might be free online or something somewhere because it's so old. Okay, so another really famous movie that came out during this time that like a lot of movie critics rank as really a landmark in cinema is called the movie Citizen Kane from 1941. And Orson Welles co-wrote the script and he actually directed and played the leading role in it as well. And it basically was kind of the, thinly disguised biography of the newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst. And it had a lot of this aesthetic quality and meaningful social message to it, which really made it special. And it really set a lot of new standards for directing. So they used a lot of dramatic lighting, extreme angles, distorted lenses, sorry. So let's take a look. So this is an angled shot of the main character that Orson Welles plays, who is kind of a representation of the real life tycoon William Randolph Hearst. So they, with this movie, Orson Welles and his cinematographer, Greg Toland, pioneered the use of extreme camera angles. So the low angle camera represents the main character as a man with a towering presence. And there's also the tilt, which this actually is showing. It's a film still, but it's tilted. And they're actually trying to show Kane's crooked politics and his crooked morality with this tilt. And this is actually goes on to be used in other films as well to show the same kind of thing. And the movie is also important because of the life that it portrays. It shows the kind of the real life character of Hearst, who was basically kind of a media mogul who achieved fame and wealth by selling really sensationalized news. And he's kind of known for saying if the headline is big enough, it makes the news big enough and it makes him money, right? So he was a very rich man as well. So during the 1940s, a new film style came out called film noir, and this was created in Hollywood. And these were dark and brooding black and white movies. I'm moving on. Sorry, that was kind of seamless, and they usually dealt with murder or ordinary folks that are kind of down on their luck, and then they're tempted at the wrong moment. And they kind of show the dark side of the American dream, basically. So we'll kind of talk about Detour, and it's considered in the vein of film noir. And film noir, if you haven't heard of it, is a very famous American film style and movement. And in this one, the main character tries to collect a dead man's large inheritance, but ends up as a suspect in 2 murders. So the film noir genre is based on the American detective fiction. This might be over. Okay, we still have time. And shot with expressive lighting and camera angles that are kind of borrowed from Citizen Kane. So Citizen Kane really helped to establish the style of film noir. So we'll kind of talk about Detour. Here's just a still from Detour by Edgar G. Ulmer, 1945. So this is kind of the style of a film noir. 1940s typically kind of dark, a lot of techniques taken from Citizen Kane. So although Hollywood dominated, many foreign directors also made movies of note, and these international films often use more creative cinematography and techniques or told stories that had never been told in Hollywood. And we'll start talking about those in the next video since we're kind of running out of time with this one.